The House will be in order. Just want to welcome a lot of familiar faces, even some that have stood here where I'm at as well. But just thanks again for the opportunity to come back and enjoy getting to see some familiar faces around the building, some that are still here and some that we haven't seen for a while. So with that, the chair, I recognize the Honorable Todd Taylor, the President of the Senate, President of the Pioneer Lawmakers Association.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So, Pioneer Lawmakers. What's the Pioneer Lawmakers Association? I'll give you a little history. This association has its origin in a reunion of early lawmakers of Iowa, which assembled in Des Moines on the 24th of February, 1886, over 138 years ago. The gathering was one of the most notable in the history of the state. Nearly 100 of the early lawmakers, more than a quarter of a century earlier, had met in session for 2 days, in which many valuable historical addresses were made by former public officials who were instrumental in laying the foundations of the territory of the state of Iowa, who enacted its first laws and framed its first several constitutions. A reception was held by the members, including Governor Larrabee, assisted by Governors Geer and Sherman, Lieutenant Governor Hull, and Speaker Head, and other state officers and members of the 21st General Assembly. 4 years later, early lawmakers again assembled in Des Moines and organized a permanent society known as the Pioneer Lawmakers Association of Iowa. The objects of the association were to cooperate with all persons and societies engaged in the collection and preservation of the early history of Iowa and to preserve the biographies of its early lawmakers of that period. All state officials, including federal officers from Iowa, and members of all lawmaking bodies who had served 20 years or more previous to any biennial meeting of the association became eligible for membership. The General Assembly, recognizing the semi-annual character of the association and the value of the work in which it was engaged, provided by law and for the publication of the official proceedings and the historical contributions and addresses of its sessions. The published proceedings of the several sessions of the association now make up more than 900 pages of history, valuable contributions to Iowa's history. The regular sessions were held biennially in Des Moines during the regular sessions of the General Assembly. And so we have assembled here today the class of 2002 or 3, kind of depending. We got off a little bit on COVID, and so we're back on track a little bit. And it was also a redistricting year. So this is a large class. And not everybody was able to be here. I'll read everybody's name from the House, the Senate, and then we'll talk about the honorary folks as well. And please stand when I call your name, and we'll hold our applause, and we'll get through the list, and then we can recognize them. So first for the House, we have Jackie Reeder, Deborah Berry, Royd Chambers, Swati Dandekar, Mark Davitt, Irvin Dennis, Mary Gaskell, Mary's here, Polly Gronzel, Del Hansen, Lisa Heddens, Robert Hogue, Bruce Hunter, Joe Hutter, who died in 2015, Dave Jacoby, Kent Kramer, James Kurtenbach, David Lalk, Steve Lucan, Kevin McCarthy, Helen Miller, Joe Olson, Donovan Olson, Steve Olson, Craig Paulson, Dan Rasmussen, Michael Reisner, Tom Sands, Bill Schickel, Doug Strike, Kurt Swaim, Paul Shamshore, Dave Jepkes, Linda Upmeyer, James Van Fossen, Ralph Watts, Roger Wendt, passed away in 2011, John Whitaker of the House. Please welcome them to the Pioneers. And on behalf of the Senate, Amanda Reagan, Darrell Beal, Tom Courtney, Julie Hosch, Herman Krumbach, John Putney, James Seymour, Roger Stewart, Ron Wick, and Pat Ward, who is deceased. Please give them a round of applause as well. So it's my honor to introduce our speaker this afternoon, who is also an honoree, Senator Putney. John Putney was the executive director of the Iowa State Blue Ribbon Fair Foundation from its inception in 1993 until his retirement in 2014. In this role, he spearheaded the efforts to renovate and preserve the historic Iowa State Fairgrounds. He is a native of Gladbrook, attended the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and received his Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from Iowa State University. He graduated from Iowa Military Academy and served as an officer in the Iowa National Guard. Putney operated a grain and livestock operation in Tama County for 23 years. From 89 to 93, he served as special assistant to United States Senator Charles Grassley. During his tenure with Grassley, Putney planned statewide activities to foster economic growth and continued numerous federal conferences, coordinated them. Putney was elected to this Iowa Senate in 2002, served 2 terms, in representing Tama, Benton, Grundy, and parts of Iowa County before retiring. He served as vice chairman, co-chairman, and ranking member of the State Transportation Committee, ranking member of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Capital Subcommittee. He was an assistant leader for 5 years and served as his party whip. He and his wife of 56 years, Emily, who is with us today, reside in a farm near Gladbrook and raise registered Angus cattle. They have 3 grandchildren and 3 children and 9 grandchildren. And it's my pleasure to introduce Senator John Putney.
Well, thank you, Senator Taylor, Mr. Speaker, Senator Whitver, Senator Dotzler, and current members of the Iowa Legislature and my fellow Pioneer classmates. Thank you very much for the great honor of sharing memories and thoughts of my time associated with the legislature as a citizen, lobbyist, and member of the Iowa Senate. I appreciate the opportunity to reflect on some history, fondly reminisce, and offer some personal thoughts on the past and the present. Last night, I took a look at some of the past speeches that were given at this ceremony regarding the Pioneer lawmakers and their respective classes. I mentioned to my wife, Emily, that these past speeches seemed a lot longer than the one I was planning on giving. Her reply was, "When was the last time you heard someone say that a speech was too short?" I grew up in a politically active environment. My dad, Lawrence Putney, was elected to the House for his first term the year I was born. He served 10 years in the House, and in 1952, he lost his bid to become Speaker of the House by 1 vote after 6 ballots. He then was elected Speaker pro tem. The results of the 1952 election were greatly influenced by the landslide of Dwight Eisenhower's candidacy for president. 103 Republicans were elected to this House and 3 Democrats. In those days, the extra 6 seats were in place because certain populous areas were entitled to more than 1 seat in the House. And in the Senate, on the other hand, they had 50 seats, and the results were 44 Republicans and 6 Democrats. In 1954, my dad was elected to the Iowa Senate and served 2 terms. He became the Appropriations Chair. And I will never forget the day that Dr. James Hilton of Iowa State came to our farm with a dream he had for constructing a major venue on the Iowa State campus and asking my dad as Appropriations Chairman to support his vision. I remember my dad expressing that Dr. Hilton's vision was exemplary, but he was skeptical that it could be funded in the near future. Being a member of the General Assembly then was a part-time job, as it still is today, and the legislature met only once every 2 years. As the problems of lawmaking became more complicated, there was a need to meet more often, and in 1969, after Iowa voters changed the state constitution, the General Assembly began meeting every year. Approximately 15 years after Dr. Hilton's vision and initiative, his dream became a reality, and Hilton Coliseum opened in 1971. Moving forward, in 1989, I met with the Speaker's grandfather for breakfast at a Perkins. Our visit resulted in Senator Grassley offering me a position on his staff. He said, "I'll tell you what I'll pay you, but I don't want you to tell anybody." And I replied, "Don't worry about that, Senator. I'm just as ashamed of it as you are." I spent the next 3 years working for the senator. In 1992, I was asked to lead the fundraising efforts for the Iowa State Fair, and I assumed that role in the spring of 1993. In addition to my job responsibilities of raising money and support, I also was tasked with lobbying for the fair. And over the course of the next 9 years, I spent many hours and days in this building while the legislature was in session. I made many acquaintances and friends in the lobby and in both houses of the legislature, on both sides of the aisle. I have fond memories of the mentorship that I received from guys like John Flannery, Jerry Fitzgerald, Steve Roberts, Brian Johnson, Larry Murphy, Larry Blix, and Scott Newhart. Even though I grew up in a political household, I really had zero aspirations to run for any office ever. However, that changed with reapportionment in 1991 when my home Senate district reconfigured back to the same district my dad represented in the Senate from 1954 to 60. During my days in the lobby, of course, I had to listen to many legislators giving speeches to their colleagues in debates, etc. I remember there was this House member who seemed to frequently be recognized about the time I wanted to go home. And it seemed to me that he would talk forever, almost like a filibuster. His name, Bill Dotzler. And when I learned that Representative Dotzler was going to run for the Senate, I almost changed my mind about running myself. But I did run, and I was elected. And I remember one respected fellow lobbyist was quoted as saying, "One of our boys from the lobby finally made it." But I got to know Senator Dotzler, and he became one of my closest friends in the Senate, and I've always been grateful for his friendship, as well as many others on both sides of the aisle. As I moved from the lobby to the legislature, I reflected on key representatives and senators on both sides of the aisle who had actively supported our quest for the renovation and survival of the Iowa State Fair. In the House, Speakers Ron Corbett and Brent Seagrass, Dolores Mertz, Dennis Cahoon, Dan Huesman, Pat Murphy, Rich Arnold, Hubert Hauser, and Chuck Gipp. In the Senate, Leonard Boswell, Larry Murphy, Tony Bisignano, Gene Frazee, Jack Kibbe, Mike Gronstall, Jack Reif, and Darrell McLaren. An example of both houses, both parties, working together. Regardless of political affiliation, I think most Iowans have a vision for Iowa, a desire to preserve our quality of life, and, of course, enhance it. As elected officials, we will always have our names somewhere in the history and archives of Iowa history. That's a humbling and proud thought, but rightfully earned through our willingness to put up our names on the ballot, march in parades, attend meetings and events back in our districts, have long talks on our phones, and represent our constituencies to the best of our abilities, hopefully in their best interest. However, I always thought that sometimes we all have taken ourselves a little bit too seriously. Occasionally, I like to play a few practical jokes on my colleagues. One day when we were debating, I noticed Senator XYZ playing solitaire on his computer. His back was towards the West Senate gallery, and I went out to the cloakroom and wrote a message to the senator with the following message. "Senator XYZ, I'm one of your constituents up in the gallery, and I wonder if you could take a break from your solitaire to meet with me." I then had a page deliver it to him, and it was hilarious to watch him fold down his laptop and stare up in the gallery. Over my time in the Senate, I used pages numerous times to deliver mischievous notes to fellow senators, all in good fun. In the Senate, I was a member of the majority for 2 years. We were tied for 2 years, and the Republicans became the minority in 2006. I was visiting with Senator Dick Dearden before the 2006 session began, and he told me that the Democrat majority leader, Senator Gronstal, was only going to let the Republicans use one elevator. I relayed this to Senator Seymour, and his response was, "Which one?" Another favorite memory I have is when my representative, Lance Horbach, was facing a primary challenge with a strong opponent in Grundy County. A meet and greet candidates was scheduled for Grundy Center, and my wife and I attended. Representative Horbach led off with his comments and then yielded to his opponent, who discussed his qualifications as a prosecutor that had great experience in addressing and replying to tough questions over his career. Horbach's opponent then finished his comments by challenging the audience to ask him any tough questions on their minds. A guy stood up and said, "How come you aren't a member of the Farm Bureau anymore?" And the debate was over. It is disappointing and alarming for me to see the erosion of civility in our world today. It is occurring every day between nations, governments, and political systems. Unfortunately, it is rampant in our own national capital and in many state capitals as well. I think of two stories that exemplified respect and civility in years gone by. Looking back, I've always been fascinated with the relationship of John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. The two were naval officers in World War II, and in 1947, both of them were elected to Congress. Although they were of much different economic, political, and social backgrounds, they became good friends. When JFK suffered severe injuries in an airplane accident, Nixon visited him in the hospital frequently. When Nixon ran for the United States Senate in California, JFK's father, Joe Kennedy, made a significant political contribution to him. When Nixon became vice president, his office on Capitol Hill was room 362, and Kennedy's was room 361. Of course, they subsequently opposed each other in the 1960 presidential election. Kennedy won by only 13,000 votes. Nixon was urged to contest the voting in Chicago, but he declined. Edward Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, reflected on behalf of his family after Nixon died in 1994 that despite the intensity of the campaign and the narrow outcome, Nixon accepted the results with grace and without spite. During Nixon's Watergate troubles, the Kennedys were silent, and the only time Jackie Kennedy returned to the White House after JFK's death was when Nixon was president. Next, I referred to Leslie Kay's writing on how Gorbachev and Reagan's friendship helped thaw the Cold War. She described the two leaders as follows. One was an avid capitalist and actor-turned U.S. president, determined to quash America's nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union's evil empire. The other, a young, committed communist who rose through the political ranks to lead the USSR, pushing publicly for reform. But Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, unusual bedfellows as they may have been, managed to forge not only a mutual respect, but a friendship which helped end the Cold War. In his book, Dear Mr. President, historian Jason Elbin writes, the confidential letters between the two world leaders forced the men to talk, debate, argue, disagree, but also offer proposals, even when they thought no agreement would be possible. I believe most of us would yearn for those days again. Thank you for keeping this institution and our state an example of civility, respect, and friendship. And thank you for all your commitments, dedication, and sacrifices, past and present, in making Iowa a great place to live.
Thank you, John. The names of the folks I read earlier are those automatically entered into the pioneers because they were elected 20 years ago. The next group of names I'm going to mention are folks that have been involved in the sausage-making process, right? They're either lobbyists or staff or maybe both or a combination thereof, but they weren't necessarily elected, but that doesn't make them any less important. They have to be nominated. We vet them. We look through the list, and we had 7 names, and this is the 7 names. They were all unanimous. So, and same thing, I would ask you to stand as I read your name. The honorary pioneer lawmakers of the class of 2024. Eric Baker, Jeff Boink, Matt Eady, Carol Ann Jensen, Jen Kingland, Carrie Scott, and Deanna Triplett. Thank you, and let's welcome them. As soon as we conclude the meeting, we'll have an opportunity to maybe take some pictures before we get back into some business of the house. And the chief clerk will have the book. The book is a book that is a history of Iowa, and it's been around since the 1800s, where every pioneer will sign that. And I do know there's a couple of pioneers that have maybe become pioneers a few years ago but didn't get a chance to sign the book. Please come down, we'll sign the book. There's one. And we'll do this afterwards. And just a quick point of personal privilege. I served in this chamber for 24 years. I serve across the hall now for 6 years, and this is my last year in the legislature. It's been an honor. It's an honor to be here, and I'm happy to turn my presidency of the Pioneers over to Representative Mike Sexton for the future, and thank you again for being here.
I didn't take advantage of my opportunity when I started out of the gate, so I have to right now, but I just realized as I was sitting here, I didn't have a chance to look at the entirety of the list of the inductees within this class, and I got thinking to myself, first of all, I would say, John, thank you for being a longtime Grassley fan. Dotzler has not changed at all. Give him a microphone. He'll speak for an hour, so that still happens. Bruce, I'm glad that you're here, and I don't have to call you down to the well. I'm not calling you down to the well, but I appreciate you being here. But it hit me as I was sitting here. I didn't realize, usually when you come to these, you sit and you listen, and you don't really know anyone that's a part of these events that are going on. And I got thinking, the first leader that I served under in the majority there when I was in the minority, Kevin McCarthy, the first Republican speaker I served under. Jamie Van Fossen used to sit over there, and everyone in the room could hear that you sat over there on a daily basis. A lot of names and a lot of friends that have been a part of an opportunity, and a lot of you took advantage of initiating newly elected Grassley, especially some of you on the Labor Committee almost 20 years ago now, and my friends. But honestly, I just want to thank you all for being here, and this is the first time I've been a part of one of these that it really hit me that having the opportunity to serve with so many of you, and you serve this state regardless of party in a great way, and very thankful to have you back in the chamber. So we'll finish up our business here very quickly. Chair recognizes Representative Kahn first, and then we'll open up for pictures and other things, Todd, or Senator Taylor at that point. So apologize.
Do I understand I have an hour then, Mr. Speaker? Is that what?
Yeah,
no?
Go ahead.
Senator Dotzler told me it was fine. Thank you, everyone. Democrats will caucus at 3 p.m. in room 19.
Chair recognizes Representative Winchittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. And thank you to all of the honorees and the inductees. As the Speaker said, I'm looking at the back of some heads sitting down there in the front row that helped make me the legislator I am today. And I appreciate all of your service and learning from all of you, the good, the bad, the ugly. Yes, I'm talking about you, Doug Strike. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, the Republicans will caucus at 2:15 in the Supreme Court chamber. If there's no further business come before the House this time, and move the House recess until the conclusion of the respective caucuses.
Seeing no further come before the House, you've all heard the motion. All those in favor shall say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes. I knew. That's okay. That's okay. We're not going to point of order you this time. You've already the motion. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The House is in recess.